This is the Harmonic Motion podcast, a place where you, dear listener, can join with automotive aftermarket professionals as they delve into and discuss the matters which matter.
Hello, it's James Dillon, your host for this episode of the Harmonic Motion podcast. We're lucky enough to talk to Tina Drayson, who's the operations director of the highly successful group of garages CCM in the southeast of England. Tina and I talk through a wide range of subject matter concerning the running and operation of a business, things like business management systems, knowing your labour rate, how you structure your operation. We talk about some of the analysis that Tina's done within the business about work mix, customer buying behaviour, and how you can shape your business to be the most profitable it can be. Please join us as we uncover lots of gems and very useful nuggets of running a successful business with Tina. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode. So welcome to this episode of the Harmonic Podcast. I'm your host, James Dillon, and I'm delighted to have with me today Tina Drayson, who's the operations director of CCM. And Tina and I are going to have a conversation. Well, we don't quite know about what, but about something interesting. We hope that you, dear listener, find our conversation about business matters and running a garage and everything associated with that useful. So welcome, Tina. Thanks very much for joining me, giving up your valuable time to appear on the Harmonic Motion podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, James. Honoured to be asked to be here.
Oh, it's a complete pleasure. It is a complete pleasure, Tina. I think I'm really looking forward to this chat, the conversation. You know, your position in the industry and also in the business, very successful business that you're in, leads you to have a very, very interesting view on a wide range of subjects. And I'm hoping that we can walk through your journey, the journey of CCM, and again, your views about, I should say the award-winning CCM, about, how you've achieved success in the garage business, you personally, and also the business, as I know some of the detail that you go into and plans and policies and procedures that you've developed and execute have, led to that success. And I think in that story of how you've managed to do it, I'm sure there's really some gems that others can learn from. So, and I'd like to start, Tina, really with the woman behind the name. So if you would be able to share some of your details about where you came from and your origin story, really. How did you end up in the trade and end up in the position, in the esteemed position of operations director of CCM?
So my background, really, I studied accounting and data statistics at college. That was my interest. That was what I was good at. That was what I was enjoying. So I did A-levels in statistics and accounting. I then left college and went into doing accountancy examination. So I did AAT, which is the account technicians, and that covered all the basic accounting procedures, taxation, again, statistics, and a little bit of business law. Then, like a lot of young women, I stopped working, stopped studying to have my family. And 4 children later, it was time for me to think about going back to work. So I came to work for a gentleman, Barry Babister, who is one of the owners of CCM. But at the time, it was for a separate entity called Mead Motors / BCR. And Mead Motors was predominantly MOT-based garage. And on the sideline, they did some sort of budget car rentals. So Mead Motors was based over in Gatwick, which is now our Gatwick depot. And the car rental was based alongside another company known as Complete Car Maintenance, which was run by Stuart White. So we shared the offices with CCM, but they were separate entities at the time. And initially, it was just to do their bookkeeping and their finance. And as my children grew and went to school full time, my position at work grew from that. And then we hit a point where actually I was doing all of the finance for Mead Motors, BCR, and Complete Car Maintenance. And then in 2004, the 2 entities amalgamated and became a limited company, which is known as Spinroot Limited, is our limited company, but we trade as CCM. And from there, it just kind of grew. We had new buildings implemented at our Ewhurst depot, and it just became from a part-time job to a full-time job. And it wasn't just finance, it was a little bit of anything and everything. It was all about the team. We all mucked in and we all did what we needed to do. And then what happened along that journey is we were sort of steadying, progressing and growing. And we hit a little bit of a plateau as a company. And we didn't really know how to get from that plateau up to the next level. So Stuart and Barry at this point decided that we needed some help, and we got the help from Andy Sava. He came in and did a garage inspection for us, and to be honest, it was very brutal, but it was what we needed to hear. And we also took on a business mentor. So the gentleman that we took on, which was probably 5 or 6 years ago now, is a gentleman called Ryan Bill. And still to this day, I work with him on a weekly basis. We meet every Friday. We go through some of the issues we have at the business and how we can move forward. So from those two kind of points, we identified that actually Barry and Stuart needed to concentrate on other stuff, but we needed someone to run CCM. And the business mentor we had, Ryan Bill, said, you've got the perfect candidate. Tina does 80% of it for you anyway. So it was at that point that they offered me a co-ownership of CCM along with shareholders. So that was really the point for me where I think I stepped up and started looking into more of what we can do to make CCM a better garage, make it improve all the necessary improvements, really, from there.
Interesting that you mentioned then the transition from, we have a joke, Bev and I, BC, before children. So what was like BC, almost on that timeline, and then once the children have sort of find their own way. So transitioning, back to that employment, it's a fraught time really from when you've had a career to breaking and then having children, because obviously things move on. How did you find that sort of return to the workplace? Was it a pretty seamless transition or?
Yeah, I was ready. So 4 children, I think I actually had 6 or 7 years of not working, and being quite career and work focused before children, I was more than ready to come back. So it obviously logistics had to fit in around school runs and nursery runs and people that were sort of looking after my children for me. But I was very ready to come back. So the transition to doing it was actually quite good. I looked forward to it. I relished in it. And yeah, it just kind of went from there.
I think there's a lot of mention of, equality and diversity in the industry. And we look at that obviously as a male-dominated industry predominantly. Your own personal experience there is really quite positive about, the workplace being able to adapt to a returning parent, because, as being a parent myself, knowing that childcare or that the care of a child and children is never quite simple, because you've got the exceptions of, illness or something happening during the school day that you've got to be able to be, there for the kids as well as there for the, for the business. So, what's your perspective on, garages enabling returning parents to the workplace? Is there enough done? Do you think we're if you imagine from the olden days, I suppose to now, there's lots of mention of it. Are we doing enough, do you think, as the garage industry to enable that transition back to work and supporting parents?
I think it depends on the individual garage. We embrace it, totally embrace it. We have staff members that work in non-productive roles that are parents, and they work around school shifts. So they'll come after school drop-off, they leave so they can do school pick-up. We have our bookkeeper on some occasions will work from home because she might have a child off sick, but she can do her work from home. She doesn't need to be in the office. We have parents that share child duty. So on occasion, somebody might say to me, I need to leave early because I've got to pick my child up from college, or it might be school, a younger child. It's really, and also the whole enjoyment of being a parent and the nativity plays and the sports days and all the things. Why should we miss out? Why should anybody miss out purely based on they need to be at work? So we don't have a problem if people come to us and say, can I have the morning off, or can I disappear for a couple of hours? It's so-and-so sports day, or I need to go and see a nativity play. It's absolutely fine. Just do it. We've all been parents. They grow too quick. You need to be there and witness that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a view that I definitely echo. I was lucky enough, to be able to do that in my own career, latterly, sports days and nativities, and it is an amazingly special time that passes really quite quickly. So, yeah, that flexibility to be able to do that is probably puts you in a really strong position as a caring employer. When we're looking at, potentially being an attractive venue for people to come to work, I think, that's something I think I witness in some other places and other garages that think about businesses that maybe don't do that quite so well. And I think that's one of the advantages, I guess, of also, the element of remote working that you touched on there, Tina, where we have that period, COVID, I suppose we should mention, the pandemic enabled remote workers, and we're remotely conversing today. Technology sort of enabled that. I think cloud-based applications to log into systems for accountancy and business management sort of make that a little bit easier. But it's really, really encouraging to hear that you facilitate that parenting role within the daily process of doing business. It's amazing. And that one of the things, personally, I think probably is not such a sharp focus in businesses that are maybe not quite so big. But, as you said, it's an absolutely critical part of being happy at work is being happy at home, isn't it?
Definitely. I think also for myself, definitely, and I think most women will probably be the same, you actually get to a point where you want to be back in the office and you want to have that engagement with adults and not just the children all the time. So being flexible and allowing that to happen, like you say, it makes for a happy workforce because they're getting the balance of both, of being a parent, being at home, but being in a workplace and engaging with adult conversation.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, well, Bev and I have had those conversations maybe when she's been with the children when they were younger all day about just need an adult conversation because we're maxed out on Peppa Pig and the Teletubbies or whatever it was. I need some sense, So there is that enriching, as people, we need different levels of stimulation, don't we? But yeah, it's an amazing thing to think about there, Tina. Yeah, and so going back to your early career, then, so you've sort of come at the business. If we picture where you are today in terms of operations director, and then think about your previous history, then, so foundation, a really solid foundation in business and accountancy and business law and statistics. So there seems to be a large element of you being into the numbers and maybe into the data and having a good understanding of that sort of really quite. I think is a strong constituent of a strong manager is to really have that ability to to have a grip on the numbers. So that in line with then the business mentor Ryan suggesting that you were the ideal candidate for the operations director. How did that conversation? Well, so question number one: were you prepared for that, or was it a bit of a surprise?
It was a bit of a surprise, but when we had the discussion about it. It was actually laid out in a format that actually I do majority of this anyway. So it wasn't like it was a huge amount of additional workload or anything. It was something that I think none of us had really recognized that was what I was doing. It was just we were all managing and doing what we were doing without actually putting a title or a name to it. So the purpose that Ryan spoke to Stuart and Barry really was to get their plan going forward of where they wanted to be in sort of 5-10 years' time and how they were going to achieve it. And of course, the big obstacle was, well, if we do what we want to do, who's going to run CCM? So yes, it was a pleasant surprise, shall we say. But like I said, when we actually sat down and worked out what this role was going to entail, 80% of it I was doing anyway. There were some things that were very hard to give up. So I did a lot of the accountancy at the time, a lot of the books. And that was something that I actually had to say, okay, I don't have the time to do that anymore. I need to employ a bookkeeper. That was hard because that is my forte. That is what I do. To be able to get someone in and, if you like, not check up on what they're doing. That's really difficult to do. And if I'm brutally honest, I did check up on her at the beginning. But I think I think a lot of people in that situation would have done the same thing. But she's fab. She does an amazing job. But that was very hard for me to be able to step away and not do that.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear that perspective, Tina. It's quite probably, if I'm thinking about maybe Stuart, who I know particularly, that role of, being in the technical arena and then growing into managing the business. We hear that, that's actually one of the difficult things for the technician role, to leave the technicianing behind and focus on the business. But it's very interesting to see that you've got that same vibe going on with the nuts and bolts of the technical thing that you were doing in terms of the numbers of running the business. That had to be that's too detailed, that's too low down. You need to maybe step out and be managerial or strategic, where I often think of the E-Myth book, which I quite like, Michael Gerber, that talks about the technician, the manager, and the strategist. And in every small business or person that's in a business, you've got varying elements of that role that you can contribute to the betterment or success of that business. And I think, it's a really interesting point you've raised there. A lot of smaller business owners really struggle with that relinquishing. So when is the time right, and how do you transition? And as you said, finding somebody that you're confident in, that is going to do it the way you want it done, maybe in their own style, but have been able to achieve the technicianing bit, in your case, the bookkeeping, to release you to do the brilliant stuff that you can do. I think a lot of garages really struggle with that. So I think what you've described there is, not going to be a surprise to many in business. And yeah, it's that trick. It's again a very interesting point that you're referring to an outside. I'll put an outside source, and I don't mean that in any disrespect, with mentorship. I'm a big fan of mentorship myself, and I find it very interesting to have that perspective that's not influenced somewhat by the nuts and bolts and the daily grind and the hand-to-hand combat of running a business. I wonder if you might be able to share, the benefits that you get as a business from being able to, and you as a person particularly, if you're having the conversations on that Friday, what is it that, that the mentorship or the external persons can sort of do for a business, for people that haven't experienced it potentially?
So I think the first thing I gained really from having this business mentor was the amount of time and effort I put into personal development. So I've spent probably the last 5 years doing a huge amount of personal development. And that's come from having this business mentor and kind of pushing me and encouraging me. I mean, you probably know from some of the social media posts and things, I do a huge amount of reading. Reading the book is the easy part. It's being able to be honest enough when you're reading, actually, I'm guilty of that, or I could improve that, and taking that away and learning from it. So one of the things I did, which come really from working with Ryan and inspiration from Andy Sabat, was I went away and did my green belt Lean Six Sigma, which actually was very difficult to do alongside working full time, but it really gave me a great insight into taking the waste out of your garage systems. The other thing I did, again, working alongside my business mentor, I was sitting there one day listening to him coach me about how I could do my role better and be a better leader for the team. And I thought to myself, actually, I could do this. I could actually become a better coach and coach the teams to be better at what they do. So I then embarked on a little bit of a coaching course, which has enabled me to, when I do my one-to-ones with the team, actually get them to think about it rather than me giving them the answers, because they buy into it more. It gives them autonomy to do their role without having to wait for me to say, can you do this? Can you do that? Has that been done? And it's about, we talk about autonomy a lot in our industry, I think. And one of the things people say is, you don't give someone a task to do, you give them ownership of that. So it falls on them. They have to be accountable if it's not done. And I hear a lot of people say, well, I got asked to do this on Monday morning, but they don't do it the next Monday or the next day. They wait until they get asked because that's the norm. Where actually having a business mentor has taught me that that's not how you do it. It's not about telling people what to do. It's about working together as a team, giving people ownership and making them accountable for what they do or don't do. We talk about anything and everything that crops up. Recruitment is another one. How do I get the best adverts out there? And what I love about working with this Jen is he never tells me the answer. He always just throws questions at me and makes me think about it. And then he'll say, see, you knew what you needed to do, but you sometimes just need to bounce that off somebody to generate those ideas. He will make me plan. So we're currently in discussion of the next plan for the next 12 months from January. Quite detailed, what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, which site we're going to be working at or focused on. And then we'll go through it in a bit more detail together and maybe put in some actions of how we're actually going to achieve this. And it's just an ongoing relationship that we've built, and it's just fantastic. And I relish our meetings. I look forward to them. There's always something new. They're great. I can highly recommend anybody do it. If you're in a position to do it. It's best.
Yes, and you summed up some really good points I picked out there, and you talked there about the leadership role. So in terms of that accountability, giving team members responsibility to see it through, it's sort of what the mentor is doing for you in a way, isn't it? And that questioning, something that resonated really with me. The mentor will never, normally, so mine is exactly the same, will never tell me the answer, but will give me some questions. And for me, I find the prep for the meeting is where I start to get, all the ideas might be fragmented and pointing in different directions. The prep starts to get me thinking about them in the right sort of direction. So they're all going in the same point, but there'll be some questions. And during the one-to-ones then, it's about the issues that you might be facing. It's the question that you hadn't quite thought of, or you hadn't thought of it in those terms, that enables you to bring, enables me particularly to bring that thought back into line. And yes, we did have the answer, but it was thinking about it in a slightly different way, because my natural thinking got me to the point of recognizing there's a problem and not having the answer. But so I would echo that. It's mentorship is an amazing experience, and enriching and enlightening, challenging yourself, challenging your thoughts. But it's not giving you the answer, it's giving you the questions to get the answer. So it sounds fantastic. So yeah, it sounds like you've really lucked out there with a really good mentor. And again, as time goes on, you develop a really good relationship, and they know a bit more about you and your business, and you know a bit more about them. But it sounds like an ideal partnership. So yeah, that sounds really good. So yeah, I think mentorship is awesome if you're not doing it. And some people, when I talk to about mentorship, they go, "Well, my business is not big enough, or I'm not." And I like, hang on a minute. If you've got questions in your life that you need some help with, your business life, then you are ready for a mentor. You're ready to engage with the mentor, but as you've identified, but are you ready to put the work in to improve yourself? Because it will, as much as your problems may seem external, there are internal things that you're going to improve in yourself that enable you to overcome and, to deal with the challenges of business. And some of the answers may be actually, partly self-aware, like you said, business and coaching course, or that Lean Sigma 6 training, which will enable you to perform better to achieve those results. Yeah, it's that's a really, really nice description that you've got all your mentorship. That's one I support deeply. Yeah, so that sounds amazing. So you're working on the current business plan for the next 12 months of development, and I'm guessing when you run a slightly bigger business that you've got there with multi-sites, that in itself presents many, many challenges. And I wonder if you might have some words of wisdom about the challenge of a multi-site operation. So what do you have to do as an operations director to enable you to manage? I suppose I'm thinking a little bit about, from a managing the business perspective, but maybe if a customer visited different sites, do they get the same experience? Are they sort of independent in flavor, but joined up in terms of systems and structure? How does that sort of work, Tina? How have you got that organized?
So the systems and processes we have in place are pretty consistent across the 3 sites. And that was really highlighted when we took on the 3rd site, which was 2019, because we kept on the existing staff, including the front of house, and we just picked up our own systems and GMS and our processes and dropped it into the new depot. And I probably spent 3 months there training every day, just doing the training. And it was an existing garage that we took over. And they were still doing everything on paper. They still had paper diaries. They were still writing everything down. And the lady that was doing the role was hanging on to this paper diary because she was so reluctant to let go. And I did, after I think about 4 weeks, I gave her a deadline. You can use both, but in 4 weeks' time, that paper diary is going in the skip. And that 4 weeks gave her enough confidence to realise that actually I can use the diary on the GMS and I don't need to be duplicating it. But there is an element, I think, with anybody, when you've got different people doing the role, it's a probable sort of 80-20% rule. 80% are our systems, our processes. 20% you put your own sort of twist on how you do that. So yes, I think if you were to go to either of our depots, you would get the same experience. But there are some variations, shall we say. And obviously there are different niches that we do at different sites. So we have one site, for example, that do a lot of alloy wheel repairs. As we all know, our roads are in absolute dire condition. So we get a lot of people that will go to our Gatwick depot that are not regular customers because we are the only person in the locality that would do alloy wheel repairs. Likewise, if somebody comes to one of our other depots, that's something that we can do for them and just send over to our Gatwick depot. So there's lots of little niches that each depot does that is different to the others. So again, that puts a slightly different twist on what the front of house have to deal with. We've also looked recently, interestingly, did a survey on our customers, which was actually, the results were really revealing, because I think as garage owners, we sometimes sit back and think, oh, we know what our customers like. We know what type of customers we have. And actually the results didn't reflect what I thought. And one of our depots came back with 46% of retired people, which I was kind of quite blown away because I didn't expect that. But it also highlighted in our figures some really interesting solutions, if you like. So we looked at our ratio of customers that had service and MOTs every year. And as a group, we were about 50%. Now, I have been told the national average is 42, but that is, I haven't checked, haven't verified that. That is what I've been told. So I thought 50% is okay, above average, but in my mind, that was still quite low. So I then started looking at it site by site. And this site that had a very high number of retired customers had a very high number of customers that had services and MOTs, and I'm talking between 75 and 82%, which obviously meant my other two sites were very, very low. So when we did this customer survey and we dug into it into a bit more detail, the two sites that had low numbers of MOT and services every year, their household income was the same as the third site that was doing very well, but the number of vehicles per household were a lot higher, and the number of dependents they had was a lot higher. So that will explain why they probably got 3 or 4 cars per household in comparison to 1 or 2. Their income per household was the same, so therefore their disposable income was having to be spread over more vehicles. And because we've identified which site does which, it has allowed us going forward to market them slightly different. But this is something that only came about by doing a survey.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? Yeah, because we're guilty, almost as garage owners and people that are fixing other people's cars, that we've got a profile of a customer has a car that has a problem that we can facilitate the repair. Sometimes that's a service, sometimes, that's maintenance and regular, or it's exceptions. And we have a profile that, it's really interesting. All customers are the same until you get into those sort of demographics where you start to analyze, the mix of customers. That's shown up some really interesting things. And a really interesting point. So you're thinking the logic behind the same household income, but the higher frequency of vehicles is that budget's being spread across a number of vehicles. And so they'll get the MOT because that's absolutely critical. That maintains the vehicle being on the road. But maybe the servicing, the proactive preventative maintenance has taken a lower priority, or they're doing them every other year, or the frequency of servicing is restricted somewhat by the budget. Is that your conclusion?
That's exactly the conclusion we've come to. And we've even questioned a few customers and asked, and they have actually said, well, I can't afford to get all my vehicles serviced. So we're doing the MOTs and the bits that we have to do, but we'll get that service next year. Even though it hasn't been done this year, we'll get it done next year. And that's exactly the conclusion.
Very interesting. Well, one of the things that sort of sprung to mind when we were talking there, Tina, was whether they were, we often hear and see garages affected by the price element. So where customers may be tempted to shop for cheap MOTs is the one where there's a deal on for an MOT in a service place that we inside the trade might think that they're doing a cost, a loss leader MOT in hope of picking up the service or the repair work for that. Is that something that came up in the conversations about either they're having you do the MOT because they picture that as a trust and reliable, trustworthy element that you're not going to fail the car on things it didn't need, which is obviously a worry of some people. But they were then maybe thinking about having the, in inverted commas, the more mundane or the lower level work or the service work, commodity work done somewhere else where they might price shop for that because they don't really maybe see the value. Or was there any correlation that them taking one part of that service and MOT work from you guys because of your profile and business, and then there may be price shopping, or was it just a case of them delaying the spend? You would get the spend, but it would be pushed out on the calendar.
We don't discount MOTs. So I think if it was somebody who was looking to get that cheaper deal, they would be going to those places that are doing, like you say, the packages, cheap MOTs, you get X, Y, Z off your service, or the garages that are doing MOTs for £40, £45. Our MOTs are full price, £54.85. And we attract the type of customer that we want, the type of customer that is happy to spend the money on having their car fixed well, with high standards, good quality parts. That's what we promote. That's what people get when they come to us. So I don't think really it's about going elsewhere for the cheaper service. I think it generally is about, I cannot afford to have every single one of our vehicles serviced every single year because of the disposable income that they have. It
makes absolute perfect sense, and that's something hopefully we'll come on to a bit later on, in that you've got your proposition, from a marketing speak, the way that your garage offers the level of service and the quality, detaching that from price and really going at the quality effect means you're not getting into those conversations. So that's really interesting. So you're in a segment of the market that is not price conscious, but is up for value and quality. So they're sort of scheduling their spend on the car over a period. Is there anything interesting that came up, and may or may not know, something that's just jumped into my mind about age profile of the vehicles that exist within those two types of customer base? So if we take, the retired segment in one branch, and then the customers in your other branch that have got multi-vehicles, do they tend to have a sort of different age profile on the vehicles too?
The category, or the garage, if you like, that had the high service with the retired people, the average age of their vehicle was only 1 year less than the other sites. And that was, the two other sites were age 10 was the average age, and the one with retired customers, it was 9. So there wasn't a lot of difference. And I even tried to find some correlation within our data, whether it was type of vehicle, make of vehicle, and there was absolutely nothing I could find, which was what prompted me to do the survey, to get that bit more information. And we were very pleasantly surprised at the amount of responses that we got, actually.
You communicate with your customers on a more regular basis because, again, if they're used to you communicating with them, some marketing campaigns that we think about for other garages, they're often disappointed by the response rate because the garage is sort of doing it as the garage needs to. So we need to get in touch with the customers rather than the communications being part of your long-term relationship. So customers are used to hearing from you either by email or a survey or social media. So I'm guessing that your higher return rates probably stem from the fact that you communicate with your customers on a regular basis. So it's not something out of the blue from the garage we never hear from. It's probably part of a more cohesive communications plan that you've got with your end users. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely. I have an amazing lady, Hannah, who does all our marketing, social media, and she does a monthly newsletter, which she sends out to all of our customers. It's not about what we do. It's not about what service we can offer you. It's about things that as a company we have done, and we have found that we get more engagement from people about the human side of CCM, the personable side of CCM, rather than sending messages out about, oh, we can do this to your car and we can do that, and trying to sell you this and trying to sell you that. And we've noticed on our social media page as well that the content that is more personable, excuse me, about something that somebody's done or something we've achieved or anything like that gets much more engagement than if you post something about work related. We do this, we do that. And Hannah does an amazing job. She does that every month. So like you say, when we then ask them, would you mind doing this survey? They're used to hearing from us. They're used to getting that email from us, and they're more than happy to take part.
Yeah, there's a very strong message there to others who are maybe new to marketing, that you have to have a consistent communication. You're absolutely right. I think we garages as marketers forget the way that they react to their marketing that they're experiencing. And interesting posts are ones that engage, that tell that sort of human story or the side of the business that people don't see. And if you are just bombarding people with special offers and deals and, blurb, it's not engaging. You don't engage with that in our own social media, so why would we expect our customers to? So, there's a really good point there. And Hannah is doing a great job. I follow the CCM page and see some of the things that come out, and it is that engaging level of content. So that's a really interesting journey and story then with the customers. So if it's not too much of a prying question, so what are you thinking of in terms of a plan to work with the customers who are in that second stage with multiple vehicles with the same disposable income? What are you thinking in terms of them as a customer base? Is there something you can do in terms of as your product offer? I'm not talking an offer, but is there a way that you can help those guys with their service and maintenance, or what conclusions did you draw from that research so far, Tina?
So my thinking at the moment, which is just in progress for me to see if I can put it together. Again, I've been working alongside Ryan, my business mentor, with this, is to potentially offer a service plan for these people where they're paying a monthly subscription, a monthly payment over a minimum of a 2-year contract maybe. And for that, you will get 1 year, you will get maybe a slightly smaller service. And the second year, you will get maybe a bit of a thorough service. It's still putting it all together of how we're going to work it. For us to do it the way we want to do it, the first thing we would need to do is to get a credit license, because obviously I think it's restricted to 4 payments in a 12 months if you without one. So again, it's in our plan, what we can do going forward. We've put some figures together, and I've kind of done a few sort of inquiries. Hopefully, if we can pull it off, we're thinking maybe mid next summer we can offer that. I'm not quite sure how long a credit license would take. My mentor tells me it's an easy process, but that would be the first thing. And then potentially offer that. And then those people then are just paying a sort of monthly payment, and it doesn't become such a big bill for them to pay. And it could be that we even do something where if you've got more than one vehicle, that we can do something slightly different. But it's all in thinking process at the moment of potentially what we might do for them.
Yeah, no, that's really amazing. So you've viewed the problem from the customer's perspective then, and offering a solution that helps them, because they sound like the sort of customer base that is is not worried about spending money on the car. It's a scheduling. They probably value the service that you guys offer. And I often think of when people have got cars in my own specific business niche of the diagnosis bit. So I'm always dealing with a problem that's happened and unplanned and unscheduled. And but repair and maintenance, some of the cars that we see are neglected. They have an MOT. They don't have a service, and partly by neglecting to look at that car for many years, the problem that we get to see has raised its head, and that could be down to potentially the oil hasn't been changed, or it's using the wrong quality, and then one of the actuators has had a problem, and now the engine's stuck in some weird mode of running the lights on, and the world starts to fall in on the customer. But it's those things can generally be because the customer hasn't really planned or budgeted to be maintaining or running a car. And it sounds like what you've got there with your customer base is giving them the ability to do that. And one of the things that strikes me, a lot of customers that we would deal with in the Diag Bay have high levels of emotion. So the car has let them down, and it's not just a car, then that's the freedom. And the freedom means that actually getting Billy and Millie to school or to piano practice or to swimming or to football, and actually mum and or dad to the job to maintain the living. It's a disaster when that happens. And, the stress that essentially that you guys with that type of service plan can hope to mitigate or avoid by maintaining regular services has probably got some level of a high level of perception of that freedom part, which we experience when people don't do it. I think maybe thinking about how that fits into the proposition of maintaining your freedom through this monthly scheduling of your perceived motoring expenses is a really good idea. I really like the sound of that.
I mean, we're not quite sure how we're going to put it together, because it's going to be very bespoke to the customer and the vehicle, because we do find, especially we get a high level of gearboxes, automatic, semi-autos, and people don't realise that having that service is part of your service. They just kind of look at the engine and the engine oil and the oil filter, and they think that's the whole package. But one of our sites, we do quite a bit of gearbox work, and we get a lot of issues where people have had the vehicle for years and the gearbox has never been serviced. So this is the difficulty that we're trying to find, is when we put this together, we need to be looking at the individual vehicle depending on what it is. So that's going to be the sort of bit that's going to be quite hard to do, but we're putting it together, and hopefully it will come off.
Yeah, and it sounds ideal. So a tailor-made and customized sort of plan for vehicle type. It sort of brings us on to another element of the conversation, actually, as a garage business offering those services. One of the key decisions, one of the key metrics, I suppose, in the decision you're going to have to make is, when we talked about MOT, I know we've had a conversation previously about labour recovery rate based on the services that you're offering, but also based a little bit on the service to the vehicle. So different vehicles have got different needs and different operations within that. So a transmission repair or a diagnosis or service and maintenance or MOT have got different costs attached to them, and you're therefore your recovery rate, the money that you're recovering on that sale you have to be on point in terms of analysing and knowing what that is. I guess that's probably one of the challenges in offering a service package, is that you're not on the wrong side of profitability that makes it unrealistic for a user to subscribe, and on the wrong side of profitability to make it not a business that you can execute in the long term because there's no profit. So what have you got in your mind, Tina, about that sort of recovery rate or the charge or the profile, and what challenges is that giving you to work out how you're going to cost that?
We're trying to set it up that the actual labour element of what we offer will still fit within what we would normally charge. So labour-wise, we won't be losing out. The compromise would be on the margin on parts. I think that's where we are going to have to compromise to make, like you say, to make it affordable for them to do, but where we're not out of pocket. I don't want to lose on the labour, because that's what we sell as garages, as labour. The parts are just a byproduct of what we do. So overall, as a company, we aim to get 45% margin on our parts. So it may mean that if I go ahead with this service package that I'm thinking of putting together, I may need to drop that. I may drop it down to about 35% or even 30%, depending on, again, it will probably be very vehicle bespoke. as to what type of service they're having and what we're doing.
Very interesting. A couple of things sprung to mind when you're having those conversations, that whether you have the ability, with somebody signed up into a service scheme, a couple of things. We have another small sideline of a business, which is software, and we run a subscription model in that software. And one of the things that we found over recent periods is the cost of doing business. So when we fixed a monthly payment with a projected shift, if you like, to account for some level of inflation and maybe movement on the cost of overall doing business, the longer out you go, the more inaccurate you are. And if you're signing somebody up for a plan, one of the considerations has to be, well, what if the market moves either up or down in that time period? Have you got flexibility in the payments? So one of the things that we found, cost of doing business changed drastically in one of those time periods, and we were fixed on an X period over a 12-month period. And so there's nothing we can do to adjust the prices, whereas obviously dynamic pricing, when somebody phones up for a service on the spot, you're almost analysing your parts as you pull together the quotation, and your labour will have been shifted to suit the current market. So your price and quotation is on the spot. But there is definitely a bit of a challenge, I think, in future forecasting over a 24-month period, what that might look like. But on the flip side, actually, if you've got somebody signed into a service plan, there's probably, I was just thinking about deals and offers subject to what your stock holding could be, that you would know that Fred's car is this particular make and model, and there might be opportunities to buy right, even when you did, if you think about pre-purchase of parts or elements of that service, that you can mitigate your overall cost, a bit like hedging your bets in a way, that you purchase those things at that moment, so your cost is fixed at the time of you put together the plan. But it's really interesting, and it's got my mind churning over with all these things about how that could work. But I think that's amazing, and I think it's a bit more positive. And I don't know what your perspective is, and this is a personal perspective of mine, about payment assist and other plans, that when the customer has an unexpected problem with their vehicle, you can offer a payment plan that sort of helps them overcome that. But and I have a fear about that with affordability and what other pressure that might put on families that are maybe having a payment assist plan with a higher level of interest and maybe a potential for a debt spiral. That's, for me, on the negative side of financing. I know why it has to happen, and I'm not unrealistic enough to realise that. But your proposal potentially is so much front-loaded planning, positive finance in a way, that you're seeing the benefit of doing that pre the service and maintenance. So I get a very good vibe about prepayments rather than on payment plans than post-payment disasters where you haven't budgeted for tyres and a timing belt and a big service, and it all comes in at once. You've had an MOT and all this other stuff is found, and there's no schedule and no budget. Talking about payment plans in retrospect is, people are generally in a bit of trouble when they get to that point, but you're trying to engineer a solution that means that that's positively possible. So I get a really good feeling about that.
Yeah, and the idea behind it is, when you come in, have your service done, in theory, you've already paid for it. So by the time you get to your end of your 2-year, for example, you've had a service done every year and it's been paid for. We have considered the possibility of having a clause where there could be an extra payment at the end. For example, when you come in and have your last service done due to the rising cost. But again, it's something we're considering. We're not very keen on it because we want the customer to feel and know what they're going to be paying every month and what they're going to get at the end of it. But like you say, we've got to just find that balance where, as you said, we can't predict what prices are going to do in 2 years' time, but we need to find that balance and measure that so that we're not out of pocket. And
I think there's a huge positivity around that plan. And I think it's really, even if it's difficult to get it going, I think that's just smells of roses and it's got sparkly things. Well, it's just such a positive way of, managing your customers' transport, budgeting. I think that's a really awesome idea. Yeah, I really do. Yeah, perfect. Of course, I suppose it's not new to the industry that you hear. We were offered on our hybrid, our EV Nissan Leaf service plan from the Nissan dealer, which is just, I'd say exorbitant, but they're running service plan costs like it was a petrol engine vehicle or a diesel vehicle with all of the, filtration and oils and belts and stuff, which just don't exist on an EV. And I think it's just interesting in terms of service plans. My only real experience of trying to be sold one was on the electric vehicle. And I think those guys' business model sort of shapes to be, that made it quite negative, because I'm looking at, well, it needs a pollen filter and a brake fluid over 2 years. And the cost of the service plan in that perspective was just, I think that wasn't great. And it sort of put me off completely. And we pay for that, pay as we go for that. But I think your idea is just so positive. Yeah, I love the sound of that, and I hope that works out for you. And good luck with the headache of sorting out, the future costs. It's going to be a nice challenge. But should you get that right, then I think that's amazing. That's secured that business going forward. If I put my business hat on, in terms of them businesses with a valuation or, have seen to have an intrinsic value. If you've got a subscription model where you've got customers signed into paying over a period of time money into the business, you've stopped also the fluctuations in business levels, because they're going to come through as they're due, rather than putting stuff off and leaving it. You smooth out the fluctuations in terms of business flow. You can probably help yourself with a bit, with that planning and predicting of when the service is going to be due and future booking. They're not going to delay because they've got no money. In terms of, we would currently see the MOT, the demand of the MOTs in a very short period of time. You've probably got the option or the ability to try and smooth that out in your own business by pulling them in a month before. So over the period of 2 years, people that are due in October could be having that done in August almost, and you can control your own spike because you can schedule the work because you're being paid for it. I think there's got some really additional other factors that could be really positive for business. So yeah, we touched a little bit there on, labor rates and recovery rates and, business management. We're talking about there understanding your costs to be able to be maintaining a profitable business. I know you've done some work into that about labor and sort of recovery rates and news maybe to some other garages. What are your thoughts then about the variability of recovery rates across the operation?
Golden nugget that Andy Saver delivered to me, which I really, really picked up on when I did his financial course probably five years ago, was the cost of doing business. Because as garages, we just choose a labour rate. We choose what we think will work. We choose as long as we're not above Joe Bloggs down the road, so as long as we're somewhere in the middle, we'll be okay. But in relation to your actual cost of your own business, where does that labour rate sit? And I really came away from that and thought, this is going to be key. And I sat down and I did all of the costing for the individual depots. At that point, we were charging more than our costs, but we were charging nowhere near as much as we should have been. And just to give you an example, if your cost of doing business is £75 an hour and your labour rate's £100 an hour, most people will go, oh, that's great, you're not making £25 an hour. But the reality is you're not, because you don't sell every hour at £100. And if you are a garage that do a lot of MOTs, that is going to drag that down. And if you're a garage that do MOTs at a cheaper rate, it's going to drag it down even more. And there's lots of other things. So one of our depots, we do a lot of minibuses for our schools. So they have their 6-week, 8-week, 10-week checks, which are all quite small, really, for the amount of work we do. And that will drag it down. And when you actually look at your recovery rate, which is your total labour sales divided by your total labour hours sold, very often it is a lot lower than you think it is. And if you say an average, somebody might pull me up on this, but I would say it's about 80%. So in the example I just gave you, if our recovery rate is 80%, that's only £80. So therefore, I'm only making £5 per hour, not the 25 that people think you're making. So going back on the flip side of the MOT rates, if you do a lot of trade MOTs, you don't gain in any other work. And I know some people will say, oh, you don't do MOTs just to get the MOT failures. But they do come as a package when you can do a retail MOT and a service and the repairs. People come to you because you do the whole package. I have it's a big bone of contention, trade rates and trade MOTs. I know someone has to do it, and I don't have a problem with that. But why can't they expect to pay £54.85? Why do they expect it to be £40, £45? And we had a scenario at our Gatwick depot where Barry would hate me to say this, intentionally shoved some traders out of the door in a polite way. And the manager we had there at the time was panicking about, but that's about 100 jobs a month. What am I going to do? How am I going to fill that work? And I sat down with him and I said, look, at the time we were charging those traders £45 for an MOT. I said, that's 100 jobs a month. And all that is generated you is £4,500. And then when you consider 100 jobs, that's 100 times you've made a booking. That's 100 times you've created an invoice. That's 100 times you've either printed it, emailed it. And then the other flip side with traders, they don't pay you. They don't pay you when they come in. They pay you 60 days later. So you're then waiting for that money. It affects your average invoice value because you're doing so many of those low-cost jobs. So when it actually happened and we started filling that time with more profitable work, we probably covered that £4,500 in about 10 jobs instead of the 100. So all of a sudden, the workload for front of house is reduced massively because of this. And like I said, I know someone has to do it, and I don't have a problem. But if you want to come to me as a trader, it will be on my terms. You will pay the £54.85. You will book your slot in along with everyone else. You won't get priority, and I'll probably get shot for saying this, Jade. But I just think that we feel up to our fellow garage owners to give them this trade rate and priority. And as a business, if you look at it from a business point of view, it's a no-no.
No, that's really interesting and some stellar points there. Absolutely right. So I often think of every customer transaction has a certain amount of business friction. And as you so succinctly put it there, that's 100 transactions, that's 100 interactions, that's 100 events, which the overhead of the business has to sort of absorb in its running of that business with a very, very low profitability. And each interaction with the customer also has the ability to not go particularly well for whatever reason. So the more frequently you're doing low value jobs, the higher the propensity of there being a problem somewhere. So, yep, but you've absolutely, the winning statement for me is you freed your diary up for doing more profitable work. And it goes to the concept of actually less can be more. So with higher quality interactions and higher quality customers with higher invoice values and better margins and potentially a higher degree of satisfaction from those customers, it's when you think of it in those terms, it's madness to accept, apart from, as you said, that the old style, what we're doing it for trade, we do trade work, that doesn't sort of cut the mustard. And I think garages thinking about that, I often put myself in the position of that trader, and I would think, well, I haven't actually had to invest in an MOT bay in the premises, in the overhead to keep the MOT bay going and staffing it and calibration costs and actually it doesn't work for me as a trader. That's because even at the full rate, this is why I'm getting them done somewhere else. So they know too well that the cost of delivering MOTs is quite high. Yeah, and there is no follow-on work, so that's really good. So you freed that up. Have you adopted that policy across the on a wider scale, or is that just in the Gatwick branch?
I'm working on the third site. I'm working on the few traders we have left on the third site. It's in my 12-month plan, James.
Good stuff.
But there's also the other side. If you are the garage that outsource your MOT, there's also this conflict that people are unaware that you can only charge your customer the same price that the garage has charged you for the MOT. If you choose to charge any more, it has to be under a service which is VATable. And the amount of people that get charged £45 and then charge their customers £54.85, you actually can't legally do that. You have to split that price up. And I've also heard of garages where they'll charge their customers a £25 pre-MOT check, and then they'll take it to the garage to have it MOTs, which will pass because you've done the check. But that customer's paying potentially £45 for the MOT, plus £25 plus VAT to have that pre-check done. So they're actually paying more. And then you've got the other side of it for the MOT garage. If you're doing a lot of trade MOTs where they're being checked, all of your numbers at a testing station are skewed by your failure rate is different. It's probably lower than it should be or lower than the average because you're having all these traders coming in that are potentially checking them. Very rarely do they fail. And it's messing with the numbers.
Yeah, so you could find yourself facing the wrath of your local MOT inspector, thinking that there's something, amiss in your venue, that you're a bit maybe not performing them against the standard. Always will bring, if your numbers are different than the national average, maybe some inspection or some queries. So yeah, doing cheap MOTs is also causing a bit of aggravation in the MOT management side of life as well. Did you get much pushback from the traders, Tina? What was the general negativity about the fact you were stopping doing, or did they generally understand that was acceptable?
It was a combination of a couple of things. We kind of engineered them to leave, but we also at the same time had an MOT tester that left our company. So because they had quite a good relationship with him, they naturally went where he went to. So it was kind of, in our situation, a win-win without it getting too diplomatic, if you like. The third garage, which I'm planning to try and do the same thing, is a little bit more complex. So I need to put a bit more thought into how I engineer that one.
So the gap in that garage then, with that space of that frequency of jobs that now wasn't coming there, how did you work as a business on that site to attract more work? Or did that work naturally was there and you've essentially then been able to pull back your future booking times? How did that work out in terms of, replacing that work with better value customers with higher margin jobs?
It did happen over time. It wasn't instant. I think we had the mindset at that particular Gatwick depot that the customer didn't have the money that we had at the other two, when we quickly realised that actually that was not the case. So we did a bit more marketing on that site. We sort of did a few sort of flyers and things to see if we could attract a few more customers. And I think over a period of time, we've just built the reputation there, and it's encouraged that better type of customer that we want. And as you say, we do less jobs now. I think we still do MOTs there, but obviously they're all retail MOTs. We obviously had a couple of niches which pulled in a few customers, like the wheels that I spoke about. We also, during the pandemic, credit for this will go to Barry Babister. He identified a little niche where people couldn't travel because there was no fly-in, but everyone was buying camper homes, motorhomes. So he then kind of did a little bit of a market push on, you can bring your motorhome to us. We can MOT and service them for you. But because our Gatwick depot has a very, very large area, we can also store them for you in the winter when you're not using them. And from that, people then started asking about the habitual checks, which we can't do. We looked into, there's lots of training, lots of certification that you need. But what we did do was we found somebody who was mobile, who was prepared, if we needed to come on site and do that side of it. So we were then in a position where we could offer the whole package. You can come in, we can MOT it, we can service it, we can get someone to come in and check all your gas and plumbing and all the bits inside, and we can store it for you for the winter. And again, it worked really, really well because in pandemic, everyone was using motorhomes, but the work is very seasonal. Obviously, people were using them in the summer, so they either do it in the winter before they want to use them, or they do it at the end of the summer when it comes back to us. But it was a little niche like that pulled in a bit more work. And yeah, I think over a period of time, we've just attracted the better customer, the customer that we want. And I think since that happened, which was probably 1920, I think our turnover's probably gone up in that area, in that particular site, by probably 25,000. And the average value invoice has gone from sort of 100 up to 270.
Amazing to hear. Well, that's interesting about the niche, yeah. And I can exactly get that with the camper vans. But yeah, going then sideways in the value chain and doing habitation checks as well, that's a phenomenal story. Yeah, that's really seizing on an opportunity that's presented itself. Yeah, and of course the storage is a year-round thing, isn't it? But they're not, apart from when they're not using it. So again, great use of, I suppose, sweating the business asset in a slightly different way. But yeah, really interesting. Yeah, really interesting. You mentioned then that you had an MOT operative leave that sort of gave you an opportunity to engender that change. And it sort of brings us on a little bit to the conversation about, staff members and team members. With an operation such as yours, the human resources element to that obviously plays a big part. There's the obvious theme of, shortages and, employment and people coming into the business. We talked earlier on about, the equality, diversity, and having the ability to offer that flexible working. How have you found over the past maybe 12 or 18 months, if we take business as a whole, not necessarily focusing just on technicians, but how have you found the jobs market, the labour market, Tina, when you've got recruitment and vacancies in your business?
We all know that technicians are like gold dust at the moment. You can't get them. I think from my own dealings with it, and we've made this mistake ourselves, which is, I think, what kind of highlighted it to me. I think as garages, when we're looking for technicians in particular, we panic because we know we've got this heavy workload coming in. We know we need somebody, but we can't quite get the person we want. So what we do is we make do. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but we interview maybe 2 or 3 if you're lucky. None of them really quite fill the gap you have in your business, but you're thinking, we've got to have someone, we've got work coming up. So you employ one of those 3. And then what happened? They get into your workplace and it becomes obvious. And even though you knew this deep down that they couldn't fill your gap, it becomes obvious that they can't fill your gap. They're really good at your basic timing belts and servicing and MOT repairs. But actually what you were looking for was someone who was a little bit more focused on the diagnostic side of stuff and the investigation side of stuff. And then what happens is, I think leaders are not strong enough to go, do you know what, this isn't working out, this isn't what we really wanted, and then potentially removing that person from the business. They don't want to be the bad person, they don't want to be seen as, so they just, it will get better, or it will do this, or we can do some training, and it never really happens. And so what happens is 6 months down the line, you've still got this skills gap. You've still got this role in your business where you need to fill someone who's a bit more to do what you need them to do. And then the flip side of that as well, when you look at the adverts out there for technicians in particular, they're very vague. There are some great ones, don't get me wrong. There are some great ones out there, but they're very vague. I've seen adverts where someone would say, we require a senior technician. What's a senior technician? Senior as in old? We want someone who's 50, 60, or senior as in experience. And that's why I think we have this issue when we take on someone who doesn't actually fill our gap, is we're not detailed enough in what our requirements and expectations are. We need to be saying, I don't need you to do services. I need you to be able to do investigation and diagnostics. And I need you to be able to use the tools that we have. And we're not. And then we jump on the bandwagon because we panic. And the other side of that as well is, if you're trying to attract a really experienced technician in knowledge, you need to display your salary. You can't say this or nearest offer or depending on experience, because what will happen is if you put a range in there for, say, between, 28 and 36,000, for example, anybody who values themselves and thinks they're worth 40 isn't going to even look at your ad. Even though it could actually be the perfect job for them, they're not even going to look. So you've got to be really realistic about putting in your salary. If you put nothing in at all, that's normally because you don't want to broadcast to your existing staff what you're advertising for your new staff. And that's normally because your existing staff are on less money. So people need to balance their existing staff salaries first. You need to pay them what they're worth. And then you won't have this situation where when you put an advert out, you can't display the salary because you don't want to upset your staff in case they see it. And I think if we were all a little bit more honest and put out in our adverts the salary we're hoping to pay or willing to pay, the experience and the expectations that we want from that technician, I think we would actually get a better response to our ads.
Yeah, I think you're right, Tina. You see a lot of those, and you raise some really valid points. I think the internal wage structure, it's very difficult, isn't it, for a business to keep an eye on the labour market in a way and then positively lift up the teams that are within the business, because often, labour reviews or cost of doing business reviews are at a higher operational level of business profitability, turnover and return on investment. And it's very, unless you focus on it, it's very easy to overcome actually that your workforce has to have that lift in, salaries. I know a lot of big corporations, and my experience previously is, okay, your entire workforce is into salary bands and groups based on functions, and there's a annual XYZ cost of living plus a productivity bonus and whatever else goes on. So they are generally lifting everything as time goes on. Whereas I feel the smaller business may not have that handle on that, or that structure within the business to be able to keep pace with changes in the labour market. Sort of goes back to your other point, and Andy Saba's a really sharp focus on cost of doing business, lifting up your labour rates and making sure that you stay competitive in terms of your costs. Should also be factored in with making sure you're competitive in terms of salary. And it's a really, really interesting point. If you don't put the salary on a technician's job role, you will get zero takers. That's almost known. If I'm in some groups for technicians, and it's widespread. People I'm not even bothering, not even reading. I look down to the salary first, and then I read the job advert, because they're benchmarking. They know in themselves their own self-worth, and they'll look at the price banding at the bottom and go, that's not the sort of job for me because it's too low. Or there's no price on there. I can't even be bothered. I'm not going to send a message. Well, I'll go to the other 43,000 adverts out there. So yeah, really good point. NESAB salary. You also, again, one of Andy Sab's points about being fully trained. Fully trained. Nobody's ever fully trained. I'll never be fully trained. I'm sure you think the same way. Technicians are never fully trained. Technology moves on. And you often see, what would I say? It's almost like cut and paste job adverts. And there'll be a shopping list of activities: service, repair, maintenance, cam belts, and diagnostics. And the and diagnostics always makes me roll around the floor laughing, because anybody that's any good at that won't want to be doing cam belt servicing and maintenance. They'll want to be maintaining their laser sharp focus on that very narrow skill set of being awesome at fault finding and using the latest technology to overcome problems. And I often feel that garages, I can picture the garage owner sat there, with his hand under his chin going, what are all the things I'd love to have in this new employee because my old one's left? And they go through the shopping list of stuff and whack that in the advert, hoping that the unicorn is going to rock up and just be able to do all that stuff to the highest level, whilst, offering the salary that's not commensurate with that. I think the third point that sort of links back to your very astute point about the cost of doing business, what we're tending to see now in the market's moved on, that if your garage isn't profitable because you don't have a good handle on the cost of doing business, your labour rate is inappropriate for the market, you may be getting business, but you're not making any profit. If you don't make a profit, you can't pay an employee. And if you can't have an employee, you can't turn the business. And I think the business machine, as I like to term it, that cyclical process, a lot of smaller garages that are struggling to employ people are basically reaping what they've sown from having a completely inappropriate price structure and labour rate. They're now at the point, and we see this again in some of the groups and forums where people are complaining about not being able to employ staff. You look at the business structure, it's because you're not charging enough. You can't afford the wages of the person that produces, the business where the profitability comes through. So, that's a fact. And, I think garage owners that are looking to employ people have to think about, is their business does their business sustain that level of employee? Or have you just got to go, well, I've got to have a smaller business because my structure doesn't allow me to have new employees that the market rate of which we're being, seeing 40, 50, 60,000 quid for a technician that's, a good diagnostic technician. The dealer groups are definitely proactively trying to recruit these people. Their business models are slightly different. And, I think it's a big attraction, whether that works longer term for the technician or not. But that's who we're competing with. I suppose we're also competing with other markets.
I think also when you look at the type of work you do as well, garages need to learn to say no more than we do. How many garages actually know what tasks earn them the most profit? If you ask, very few people would. So when we look at recovery rates and we were talking about MOTs and certain things that will drag it down, there are also things that will raise it up. So for example, in my example I used earlier, the labour rate is £100. If you charge £65 to do a brake fluid change, that's kind of about a half-hour job. If you're charging £65 labour plus the brake fluid, that's raising your recovery rate. So look at some of the jobs that you do that actually do it that way round. The other thing that comes up a lot, which totally baffles me, is tyres. The amount of garages I know that will say to me, I just add £25 on to a tyre, and that's what I charge a customer. Or if it's a bigger tyre, I add £30 on. And I sort of say, well, where's the labour element of this? Oh, we just add a car, we don't do labour. When really, in my opinion, you should be adding a slightly lower margin on your tyre, but you need to charge labour. You need to charge 20 minutes, whatever it may be, because there is a labour element of you actually removing that tyre, the wheel first, the tyre, and then the balancing and the refit. Oh, it's easy. We just add £25 onto the tyre or £30 onto the tyre. But the difference in margin, if you're adding £25 onto a £50 tyre, the margin's quite good. But if you're adding £30 on a £150 tyre, your margin's suddenly dropped right off and you're not adding any labour. And I think garages do it because it's easy. They don't have to break it down. And there's lots of little jobs that they do that, and AC is another one. Oh, we just charge a round off price. We just charge, 90 quid. Well, how about splitting that into the labour element of that task and then the parts of the actual gas? But it doesn't, garages don't seem to want to be able to identify that split. And I think, again, it's not knowing the numbers and maybe not having the time, maybe not setting the systems up properly. But by doing it all like this, you will then be able to identify what tasks earn you the most money.
Really valid point. And I think it does come down to that, organic. A garage maybe that's grown organically hasn't got that systemization in place to be able to think about the profitability of that job. It goes a little bit back to the labour rate. So the air conditioning gas price is very, I think, driven by market, what Fred is doing or what Ned's doing or what Ted's doing, not thinking about, as you say, the labour element and the cost price of the gas and factoring in, calibrations and equipment wearing out, replenishment of equipment, that they're doing. I don't see many people that are making a healthy profit by finger in the air guessing what they should be charging. It's normally the other way, that's a loss and it's dragging the business down, and they'd be better off not doing it. So yeah, I think it's a bit of that, isn't it? It's being able to step back and have that provision or the plan. Without a plan, that generally in a smaller business, you might find the business owner's busy. He's on the phone or he's doing something else, and the front of house or reception will say, "We've got an aircon job, what are we charging for this?" And with almost no thought and no forecast, a number is plucked out of the air because he's seen it in an advert or in the newspaper or in a Facebook ad. They're charging 90 quid, that's what we'll charge. Basing your business proposition and your business model on somebody else's is probably at an equal low level of thought about how they were charging for it, and all it perpetuates. So yeah, I think probably a bit about planning. I don't know how much time the smaller businesses actually put aside to thinking about development of a business model or their pricing structure. I get the feeling a lot of it is shoot from the hip and, look at labour rates. Just guessing, and then not knowing. We had conversations in the past on this podcast about going back to your roots, really, Tina, about accountancy and management reporting, and how many smaller businesses see their accountant once a year, and that's for the big discussion about, okay, how did we do, boss? Great news, you made 120,000 quid worth of profit, and the poor old business owner sort of looking around, well, where did it go? I haven't got that in my pocket. And, they're using accounts retrospectively, almost, probably, let's be 2, 3 or 4 months after the year end to see how they did in the previous January, because the figures are so skewed in the history. I don't know, how smaller garages really need to get a grip, or how they can do that. In a slightly bigger, more well-organized garage, I know the systems that we'll use to manage the business, the garage management system, is key and important. And maybe in a smaller garage with less turnover and more pressure on the profit, I would venture to suggest that the management system is probably more necessary to ensure future survival and profitability. And in a bigger garage, it's necessary to do those things, but also to make that business manageable. What do you think about small businesses? What in terms of things that they should be looking to do, thinking about costing and pricing and managing the business? What would be the basic level of stuff that a small garage should be doing in terms of a system of some sort to manage their garage?
I think you hit it on the nail when you said that they don't generally find out until 12 months past, and then that data becomes historic, and all those price increases and wage increases haven't been taken into account. I would personally recommend, as a small garage, to get yourself a bookkeeper, but a good bookkeeper, because not only will they do that kind of the data entry for you, but you could employ someone on a very short term. They don't need to be full time. They could be 1 day a week, but it would keep all of your paperwork and data entry up to date. And from that information, even though you might be thinking, I can't afford a bookkeeper, the benefit you would gain by having that knowledge, up-to-date information that will then allow you to charge the right labour rate and make sure you put your prices up where you need it to, the value in that will soon pay that person's wages. I know it's a big thing to do, and I think a lot of garage owners, again, it's financial, it's confidential, it's kind of personal. They don't want people to see that information. But the benefits, I think, far outweigh the cost of having someone on site, maybe 1 day a week, 2 mornings a week. And that would be the perfect job for a mum that's got school children, that's probably very, very capable, very knowledgeable, and can come in just a few hours a week and do that for you. And the benefits would be huge.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And we hear the horror stories of, garage owners putting the box of receipts, shoe boxes of receipts to the accountant for the year end, and not really having taken a look at have they got enough money to pay their part supplier? Have they got enough money to pay the wages and the rent and the rates? And if so, it must all be working. Where, in fact, you and I both know in that scenario, the garage owner's wages and his own recompense is probably at the peril. So that because there is no profit left after anything else, they end up working for nothing. And essentially, the business is not profitable. It's an endeavor that employs people for zero profit. And but for employing a bookkeeper that could do the books on a weekly basis, which means that at the end of the month, or maybe a week after the end of the month, you've got a view on how that month went that gives the garage owner the ability to change how the coming month is going to go by thinking about profitability. It's an immense return on investment for somebody's wages for a day to be able to keep on track. But I think I get the feeling also, and I don't know what your view is on this, Tina, about some level of business training for entrepreneurial technicians or people that come into garages that don't necessarily have a business background. What's your view about the importance of that, even in a very small endeavour?
The couple of things that I think would be definitely beneficial and every garage owner should do is the finance. Know your numbers. There's lots of fantastic GMSs out there that give you numbers. We all can run a report and see our technicians' efficiency, productivity. We can run a report that will show us our gross profit, and it's great. But if you don't know what it means, and you don't know where it comes from, and you don't know how to make it better, it's just useless data. So know your numbers, know what they are, know what they mean, know how you can influence them. And the other thing I think is a must is leadership. I think one of the things that's made a huge impact for us is the personal development that I've done and the leadership skills that I've learned that I've been able to utilize at CCM has just made the staff feel happier. It's made me more approachable. So scenarios and situations that come up get addressed there and then. They don't fester. And I think that's another thing that happens in small garages. The owners are so, like you say, they're working the shop floor or they're on the front desk. They're unaware of how their staff are feeling, what issues they may have, what's going on in their home life. And some people might think, well, you're just here to work, just come in, get on and do it. But they're your team, they're your family. You need to know, because something going on at home could influence their work, could have effect on their work. And it's not necessarily that they've done anything wrong, it's just they're in a bad place. They need a bit of support. So finance, definitely, know your numbers, and leadership, absolutely must do for garage owners.
Yeah, very, very sage advice, very sage advice. I get the feeling, again, my experience is team problems will also generally, or people problems will happen at the wrong time. So as an owner manager, when you're up against it, muck and bullets are flying and something's gone wrong and the customer's, on the phone and something's happened, you'll get that clue. Somebody will say something in your team that you'll miss because you're not, it's not an appropriate, you're not in a time space continuum to be able to accept that. I think, not doing it as a one-to-one away from the muck and bullets is a big mistake, but that leadership bit, smaller garage owners under huge pressure on so many fronts that they can't hope to have the time to do that without some level of understanding that it's really important and the importance of it, but to factoring into their plans. And I think, the business planning bit, I think if you talk about finance, for me, the only other one I'd add into that is a little bit of systemization, structure, business perception. When I first did my business training, coming from an engineering background, I drew parallels with the business as being a machine. So what has to go in this end? How does the process happen to turn it? And what drops out as a byproduct? So generally machines take energy and they do work in producing something, and a business is very similar. And that's the way I got my head around it. Once I understood that those basic bits, then it was more about structuring. Okay, so how do we load the machine appropriately? How do we measure and manage each of the stages as completing? And how do we validate the quality of the output? So taking the understanding of the finances, then putting a little bit of business structure on that, then sort of gave me, some great clarity. And it's not difficult, but I think it is. I think one of the complaints we hear from garage owners is that they are so busy, maybe barely making a profit. They don't have time to come out and do training. Being in the training business now, it's one of those, we can't release X, Y, and Z for training for now because we're too busy. Okay, but it's maybe exactly when you need that training. And if you had that training, you wouldn't be busy doing the wrong stuff. And, taking a step away from cutting trees down to sharpen the saw gives you higher effectiveness when you go back to chopping down trees. So there is, I think that's a big pressure for the maybe garages and smaller businesses, but you've got some really good stuff there. Business training, knowing your numbers, and leadership, absolutely.
I think also one of the things that a lot of people, even big garages, and this is something that we struggle with as well at times, is the actual workshop loading. So when you've put in all those systems in place, the amount of garages that don't complete the work that's booked in for the day, and tomorrow's already booked, and things get carried over. How do you manage that diary? How do people... And that, again, is when you get situations like you were saying, where people would say, oh, we can't release him for training because we've still got all this work. Whereas if that's planned, if that person's diary is blocked out on that particular day, next week because they're training, you work your diary around that. But it is a problem that I think many, many garages have, is that workshop diary loading is very difficult to manage.
Yes, true. And maybe they're overloading without knowing it by being completely booked and having, essentially all of your slots sold. I always visualize the diary as having spare to the right, because all your problems will shift to the right-hand side. If you picture your day plan as Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday on the left-hand side and hours 9 through to 5 along the top, all the problems go to the right. And so if there is no spare on the right-hand side, the next day comes around and that's full. Where does it? You can't magic other hours. I think it's that confidence almost to be not underbooking, but booking appropriately for the resources that you've got, and maybe forecasting, when a booking turns up for a particular operation, what's likely to come out of that. So if it is an inspection or a service, are you allocating time for the inevitable worn searing suspension, geometry, bushings, bolts, or it may be tires, it may be exhaust, it may be something that's not factored in. That I think that is an art form in itself, is having the ability as a management function to provision scope for, we need, where's the scope for the disasters? There is no disaster planning. We're fully loaded with no contingency. One
of the things that I've looked at CCM is how much time we spend on MOT failure. So I have measured our hours for MOT failure and advisory work. And if we did 12 MOTs a day, our average is probably the same as national average, is about a third. 4 of those are going to fail. Our average labour failure time is 1.2 hours. That part is easy, working out the equation. So that's 4.8 hours a day I'm going to need to do MOT failures. The hard part is actually leaving that free in the diary. The calculation is the easy part, but having the nerve to go, no, I've got to leave that free. I can't book that. I've got to leave that free. And for people that do more MOTs, that could be higher, and you could get to the point where actually I need to leave a whole person diary free every single day just to manage that MOT failure work, but we don't. Somebody will ring up and say, oh, can you just squeeze me in for this? Can you just squeeze me in for that? And they see that gap and they go, oh, yeah, we'll just do that. And then you've got this problem where it just rolls over.
Yeah, very true. And you can never catch up. Catch up then is a huge disaster. And I think we often, in that situation, as business owners, we need to have the diary full, but we often maybe don't think about the stress that puts on the team members, that, your team can help you and support you in the case of a disaster. And they can sprint through and maybe work longer, or, cut things a bit shorter in terms of their rests, or do some extra overtime. But it becomes often then that's the default, that we're actually trying to sprint the marathon. We're trying to sprint all throughout the year to cope with the slightly inappropriate technique that we're using to plan and schedule the work. And I think the other thing maybe there, Tina, is also now about the difficulty in supply chain, that you get your MOT and the failure, parts availability is quite difficult. And if you have a vehicle that needs a part that's not available for 2 or 3 days, that problem moves into, further down the line. And if you get 2 or 3 of those, it's a very complex subject, isn't it? Workshop scheduling and loading.
Very difficult to manage. It's something that a lot of garages struggle with.
Absolutely. And I suppose the GMS, can help with that. There are some processes and software techniques that we can employ. And I think, that's one of the distinct areas, I think, in terms of advantage that a GMS can do over maybe a paper-based system, is it can help you organize your slots and move things around graphically, and maybe against a process that can help prevent some of that stuff happening. Tina, look, I'm just conscious that we've been gassing away here for a little bit of time now, and we've covered some immense subject matter in some great level of detail. And I'd just like to take the opportunity on behalf of our dear listener to thank you for coming on and sharing your views. It's been really, really useful. You've got an amazing business there and some phenomenal ideas, and also, the way that you've analysed that business to think about opportunities that exist in shaping the business. I think that's a definite inspirational points there for other garage owners to look at and think about. And hopefully, in some small way, our discussion has helped people think about their own problems in a slightly different way. To recap, I think the mentorship, a vehement believer in that. And in terms of a resource, you can talk to local business groups, and also your business support in the council can help you with putting you in touch with a mentor. So if people out there are listening to where do I find a mentor, I would put you in touch with the local council for business support groups as a first stop, and you'll find potentially an introduction to start along that path. Tina, as we come to the end, I've got a little habit where I present our guests with the opportunity to have a magic wand. And in the magic wand, we give you 2 wishes, an up swoop and a down swoop, to be able to think about something in the industry that we work in and love and enjoy so much, of being able to change those. So I'd like to open up the opportunity, if you would, putting you on the spot a little bit. What would be your 2 wishes if you had the magic wand to be able to change anything at all in the industry?
I really, really would love that these people that do this work, these mechanics and these technicians, value what they do and really get down and understand the worth that they have, so that as an industry, we can all go forward and charge the amount of money that we should be charging. But sadly, there is always going to be there's always going to be that person that undervalues because they're trying to cut someone off or, get the cheaper price. But we're all in this together. We all do this amazing work. After our homes, our vehicles are our probably most expensive possessions that we own. And yet the people that maintain and repair them for you, we're our own worst enemy. We just don't value our worth and what we're capable of doing. So my magic wish would be for everyone to be able to realise that and accept the fact that the work you do when you work on people's vehicles is actually phenomenal, and value that.
Brilliant point. Very well made, Tina. And that is a brilliant wish, and I hope that comes true. I really do. Yeah, so we live in hope. So yeah, finally, Tina, once again, personally, thanks very much for giving up your time and appearing. It's been an awesome way to spend an hour or so chatting away. Really value your opinions, and I think you're a huge asset to the industry. Your views, perceptions and experience that you've got are amazing, and thank you for sharing that with our podcast audience today.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm very humbled and honoured to be invited. I think we could have gone on chatting for longer, but it's been fab. Thank you very much for the invite.